Right, thank you very much for all attending. We'll get underway with our Strat and Poll Committee meeting for the 11th of June. Tracy, if I can get you to open with a karakia, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Morning, councillors. Whakataka tahau ki te uru, whakataka tahau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, I hiaki ana te atakura, I teo, I huka, I hauhu, ti hei mauri ora.
Thank you, Tracy. So in our run sheet today, we've got, there's the note to the addendum to the agenda that you would have seen come through that was sent out on the 6th of June regarding the submission on the resource management around the extended duration of the coastal permits for marine farms. And an overview, we've got fairly, quite a bit to get through today. So we've got 3 decision items and 3 information items. Lunch is scheduled for 12:30, but if we finish a little bit earlier, we'll look at bringing up that biodiversity accord workshop and then do lunch after that. So I shouldn't imagine that we'll be having lunch any later than 1 p.m. Health and safety statement, I'll take that as read. If there's any other issues for anyone on health and safety. Oh, we do have visitors. You're quite correct. Yeah, thanks.
Good morning. In the event of an emergency, if you exit through the doors that you came in and the door to the left, and our meeting point is across the road in the park. If we have a duress signal go off, please follow our chair's instructions and we will likely lead you into the councillors' lounge. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Apologies, we have a couple of apologies. Councillor Strange is an apology. Councillor Nicol for lateness. You know, she will be coming in online. And Councillor Story for lateness as well. And oh yeah, Councillor Clarkson, sorry, Bruce has got COVID. Yeah, any other apologies?
Warren. Potarana.
Yeah, Karakia.
I'm gonna apologies for early departure.
Okay, thanks.
Probably about 11 a.m.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Any others? Thanks, Chris. And second, and Councillor Graf. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Confirmation of the agenda as was circulated. I'm happy to move. A seconder. Thank you, Councillor Hughes. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Are there any other disclosures of interest on any items that we have coming up in the agenda today? No, nothing there. We'll carry on. So we move on to the deputation with our group from ACRE. We do have a brief slideshow, and if I can ask the ladies to come up. Oh, sorry, Shepherd, I didn't see you coming there. Yeah. So we have with us today Crystal, Via and Shepherd. Good morning, and I'll hand over to you guys. The right hand button will bring a red light up.
Yep.
And you're away.
Cool. Okay.
And just keep nice and close so where people online can hear.
Yep.
Thanks, Crystal.
Okay. Kia ora, Crystal Ō-Rākau. Thank you for making the time to meet with us. We're from the ACRE committee, and I'm quite a new member, but I'll just let the others introduce themselves first.
Oh, you'll need to just push that right hand button, Shepherd. Yep.
Gadget. Kia ora, my name is Isaac, English name Shepherd, and I work with a couple of groups around the community, so I'm here to support ACRE today. Kia ora.
I'm Via. I'm with ACRE for 8 months now. And in my professional life, I work as a terrestrial ecologist. And in my private life, I volunteer lots for different community groups around the Waikato region.
Thank you.
Excuse me, can we roll the slider to the next? Yeah, that's, thank you.
Yeah, so today's just basically we just wanted to show our faces. Like we mentioned, some of us have only been on this committee for a short period of time. And we were like, well, if we're going to be called an advisory committee to the regional council, obviously it'd be nice to meet with the council once in a while. We've had great attendance from some of the staff and some councillors that have already met with us when we've met together. And that's been great, and that's kind of part of the reason why we are putting our own time into this committee. My background's also in ecology, and I run the Karakia project out at Raglan. And like these the other guys here and many of the people on the committee, we're a diverse bunch, but many of us have lots of grassroots experience. We connect in with our communities a lot. And we kind of come together and we knuckle out some of these tough issues together. We don't all come, with the same opinions, but we can meet together and kind of, figure out maybe how we can move things forward positively. And what are some of the important things that we see happening in our communities? In the past, like I've said on the committee, like the West Coast Zone Committee, so I do know some of you. And that was a really great way to, to have a voice into some of this decision making. But I kind of see we've just gone through this fast track bill kind of submissions. Our committee is a little bit like a fast track for you guys to zap into some of the things that maybe are happening in the community in a positive way. But anyway, some of the things that we're seeing is and wanted to respond to councillors too, is we're seeing that, your investment in community groups is significant and much appreciated. And the response from councillors last week or the week before, by increasing the community funding has been incredible, and we really appreciate it, and we just wanted to pass that on. But as you'll see on the board there, we've got a few other things that have been of note to us, and Shepard's going to just speak on a few of those things before we open up for questions.
Yeah, so one of the bigger problems I've had recently in the last 2 years is the actual disrespect and disconnection of grassroots in our community. And one of the examples is our project with fires and someone going in there, basically cutting big holes in the project. They're not taking the wood, so it's been done on purpose. I'm just about to start with the other groups. The Karakia Forum, that's a bigger group with their own groups around Hamilton. And as part of ACRE, I'll be looking into that, of how their projects are going. And not just that in terms of health and safety, so we're just about to do that soon with Karakia Forum. And the biggest, I think for me, being a mātauranga education, is the grassroots with our children, with the kids, the schools. And I've got a few schools coming up, and we will be adding that into that kōrero. We just don't want vandalism happening in our community. Norm Hill, the river sweepers, we've been doing a lot of work around that area. So I'm sort of in the area now where we're looking at how we can stop this from occurring for the future to come. Hamilton, Garden City, right? So we must keep it that way. Kia ora.
Okay. Anyway, just if there's any questions, this is really short and sweet, we know. But we just really appreciate the opportunity to connect. And we'd love to invite some of you to meet with us in future, whether we just do that one-on-one or if you join in to our committee once in a while, that would be great. We meet monthly. Thank you.
Thanks, Crystal. So, yeah, just appreciating your support and your submission to our long-term plan around the Natural Heritage Fund and that increasing that rate. So, really looking forward to seeing that money hit the ground in those community organisations. I know my Coromandel area, a lot of great organisations up there doing a hell of a lot of work in the pest control and biodiversity space and everything like that. So, yeah, we'll open it up to councillors if they have any questions of the ACRE team. Yeah, Stu.
Yeah, no, thanks. Good to see you, Crystal. Yeah. Hey, couple of questions. Firstly, for us, Tracy, we used to get the ACRE meetings in our calendar, but I'm not convinced we are anymore, are we? But
Oh, sorry.
can you turn your light on?
Sorry, just through you, Mr.
Yep,
Chair.
thanks.
So I'm not the director involved with ACRE
Yeah.
anymore. I used to be.
Yeah, that's right.
But
Yeah.
I'm not anymore, but we can.
It's just one we should chase up because I mean, I don't want to come to all the meetings and I can't, but it'd be good to come to the odd one now and again. Yeah. We know they're there. So are you actively submitting on things like the fast track and various other things, or do you sort of have resources to do that?
Yeah, so we have, both individually, organisationally, and as a committee, we
Yep.
have,
Yep. Okay. And what would you say, because I no doubt ACRE's evolved a wee bit to what it was originally intended to do. What's sort of the main thrust of your work these days?
Yeah,
Can you quantify it, or is it a bit too broad to sort of-
yeah, I mean, partly we're still getting to know each other and
Yep.
coming together quite with a bit of a refresh.
Yeah. Okay.
And kind of questioning that among ourselves and saying, hey, what are we all about and why are we meeting?
Yep.
And how can we be most effective?
Yep.
And kind of, so we are still in a real getting to know each
Okay.
other phase.
Yep.
But I think speaking on major issues that would be of relevance to councillors and meeting with councillors and just, hopefully just bringing a voice that's where we've already gone through a process of like, hey, what's important to us and how can we find a happy medium that we can all agree on to move forward.
Yeah.
And so I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
And hopefully saves councillors a little bit of time having
Yeah.
to wade through lots of community consultation sometimes themselves.
Yeah, because from memory, again, I'm out of touch, Tracy, but and you probably are as well. We used to provide, I think it was support via way of sort of administration type services and things like that. And I guess where I'm going with that, it'd be good for us just to have a refresh so that we understand that as well. And I think maybe given the process it sounds like you're going through, a little bit of input from us, I think would hopefully be constructive as well as to how we see you adding value as well. Yeah.
We'd be really open to, feedback from you all as well. We have had staff time, we've had the support, and it's why I think many of us that have come out new have said, if we're going to use resources from council, if we're going to spend time coming in and having these meetings ourselves, let's make the most of this voice that we have.
Did you want to comment just around that, please?
Just through you, Mr. Chair, and for councillors' information. So we as an organisation have support ACRE in that we convene the meetings here, and we support through Neville and Neville's directorate, so the Director Customer and Community, support for the meetings, take minutes and coordinate. But there is a good conversation to have around that refresh and refocus.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Stu, because I think that's important to get councillors get their heads around and then being aware of when you are meeting and opportunities to join in those meetings online, possibly. No.
Well, it's along the same lines, and thanks for bringing it up, Stu. I'm not quite sure from the paper whether ACRE was established in 1989. I know the regional council was, but the comment that you've just made, insofar as you're trying to work out what you do, I think it's incumbent on council to actually understand what the relationship is. Is there a move away from the advocacy role and all that's documented here on page 8? So I think it's time for council to understand and agree with what's the relationship. And so I don't know, how can we make sure that that happens alongside acre, so we actually are on the same page? We don't have to agree, but we're on the same page of what the purpose is. If council's funding them through kind or otherwise, yeah, I just think there's some work to be done here.
Through the chair, look, that's something that we can bring back to perhaps this committee, just so the committee understands the gestation of acre. It has been around for quite some time and was initiated by this council to provide that service, that understanding of what's going on out in the community. Things have changed. Things have changed significantly over the last few years. So I think there's an opportunity to bring that back, and from my understanding, that is the conversation that acre is keen to have with councillors.
Well, that's really good, through you, Mr. Chair, insofar as I know in my in the farming, I regularly question why I'm doing something, and council, I think, needs to question and make sure that it's, the support is continued for the right reasons. And I'm not saying I don't want to see acre. It's just going on ad infinitum without actually checking in and saying, is this still appropriate? Do we need to have a serious conversation about direction, or can we do more to support, or whatever? So it's timely that we have a rethink ourselves.
Yep, thanks for that, Noel. Yep.
Yeah.
I'll just come to you, Stu, for the last question and a wrap up. Thanks.
Yeah, from memory, it was a Gordon Stevenson construct, I think, acre, going, but probably was 89, yeah. Just want to make sure the timing, I'm not sure what your timing is, because we won't be getting together a Stratton poll for a few more months, but we can think about that, but we just want to make sure that we're in sync with input coming into you guys as well. So what's your sort of time frames are you thinking in terms of your refresh process? If it's still a bit grey, that's absolutely fine, because we are too. So
I mean, none of us come to these meetings to waste our time, so we'd be keen. I think what we can do is go back to our committee we meet monthly, and put this forward and have a real review of, what's on paper, and then maybe pass that to back to council to say, hey, this is what we think, what do you think? And that there's a feedback process. In the meantime, we might hit up some of you to meet one-on-one and just to hear voice. I think it's really healthy just to, just discuss things. And we've already met with people like, Pamela and that, and had, just hearing, the passion of the councillors and what you care about, and seeing how we can connect in with that and bring voice from a community perspective.
Thanks, Rob. We're just about to wrap up, but I will go to two quick questions from councillors that haven't spoken. So Ben and then Robbie, and then we'll finish. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wondered, could we get copies of your submissions that you make on Fast Track Bill and the other things in the last year, so that we can establish how exactly acre is positioned in relation to the regional council? So is acre deemed as part of the regional council, might be making submissions that are different than what we're thinking? So just to be useful to see what you've submitted on, and yeah, thank you.
Just as an action point, and Robbie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mine is a very simple question. I think you need to invite more councillors to your meetings, or to things that you think that we could have a perspective, or like I'm the chair of ICM and I've never been asked to one of your meetings yet. So, and I'm the one that, my committee's the one that funds you. So I think that's vital. So I just put that option out there to please invite us to see what's going on. Thank you.
So great. I think there's some pathways there moving forward on both sides of the track. So excellent. So thank you, Shepherd, Via and Crystal, for coming in and presenting today, and you will see more of us. Thank you. Right, the next item up is the confirmation of submission subcommittee minutes. That is on page 11 of your agenda. And we're receiving two lots of minutes for memory.
So, Mr. Chair, just to help out, the two lots of minutes that we were receiving are the minutes on to the draft long-term plan that we'd signed off, and also to council submission on the fast track approvals bill. FYI, councillors, we were advised late Friday that we do have a speaking spot in front of the select committee, 10 minutes this afternoon from 4:30 until 5. So our chair will lead that discussion, supported by Councillor Mayer and the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Tracy. So everyone happy that was in those rooms on how those minutes were recorded? They're on page 11 to 15. Relating to the 26th of March and the 17th of April. Sure you've pre-read them, Noel? Yep. So I'm happy to move. Have a seconder. Thank you, Stu. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Next, we move on to item 8, which is the Remembrance Bill, and that's on page 19. Have we got Marley here to speak to that, or is...
It appears we haven't, so I've read it.
Happy to move it.
Okay.
Happy to move.
So councillors, perhaps if I can just highlight it. So this is the Te Pirimo Ō-Rākau Tipai or Maumahara Remembrance Bill. Members will be aware that there was an event last month out at Ō-Rākau. This is a bill that's going through the House in terms of returning land to fulfil some treaty obligations. It transfers the Ō-Rākau battle site to Maniapoto, Raukawa and Waikato Tainui. In terms of questions that have been asked of this paper, it does not concern any land that is owned or administered by Waikato Regional Council. You will see there in the report in paragraph 7 that the amount of annual rating revenue from this portion of land is $1,000. Once the land is returned in accordance with the bill, it will get a reserve status which provides exemption under the Rating Powers Act, and council will be advised of that, just as we are with any land use that changes classification.
We have a mover and a seconder for the motion. Any other comments? All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Thank you. Is this our addendum item?
Oh, sorry.
No.
Yes.
Jumping.
You missed one.
Okay, so councillors, we had intended to do the addendum now, but I see Jane is here. I don't have anyone to present the addendum, so you might have me again, perhaps. Okay, perhaps if we just take Jane.
Yeah.
And then we'll go back to the chair.
Okay. So thank you, councillors. What we're doing, and for those online, we're just jumping onto item 9, which is on page 22, which is our submission to the South Waikato District Council long-term plan.
Morning, councillors. So this item just brings the council's submission to the South Waikato District Council's long-term plan. It's retrospectively been approved today. It's already been submitted and reviewed by constituent councillors.
So we have a mover in Councillor Smith and a seconder in Councillor Hughes. Were there any comments from anybody else? Councillor Dunbar-Smith.
Oh, I just noticed item 11 that there's another climate adaptation plan happening. So there's quite a few of those happening now. And I'm glad we brought in our policy that there's a rating principle applied for these things, because it'd be interesting to keep track of the number that are happening and what timeframes are.
Yep, Tracy.
So just through you, Mr. Chair, so we had an update at the last committee meeting. So I have said to the team, let's not update every month, every meeting, perhaps every second meeting. So we'll definitely include that in our update for our August committee meeting so we can understand. Yep.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, all those in favour? No. Opposed? So carried. Thank you, Jane. Is Lizette going to speak to you? Okay.
So councillors, if I can take you to the addendum that we sent out last week. I will just preface this by saying that it's not common that we have addendums to this committee. However, we were notified about an hour after the agenda went out that the submission to this bill closed this Sunday. So as we had enough time to get it on this committee meeting, we thought we would get it to you rather than schedule another submission subcommittee. Hence why you have the addendum in front of you. We also, again, because the timing has been somewhat truncated and we have had to coordinate with everybody in the organisation, we do have a couple of further amendments that we would like to suggest for the submission, and Leah has those that Lizette will be able to take you through on screen. Over to you, Lizette.
Kia ora koutou. Don't have to speak quite so close to the microphone today, I noticed. All right, so as Tracy mentioned, this is the submission on the Resource Management Extended Duration of Coastal Permits for Marine Farms Amendment Bill. And as Tracy mentioned, the committee called for submissions less than a week ago and they're due to close on Sunday. The bill intends to address concerns by representatives of the marine farming industry that obtaining a replacement resource consent for their industry is costly and time consuming. According to the government, the bill represents an effort to give marine farm consent holders certainty and greater confidence to invest and to give effect to one of the coalition agreement points to deliver longer durations for marine farming permits. The bill proposes to extend all marine farm consents automatically by 20 years, but not beyond 2050. No applications are necessary, so it's automatic. It does allow the council to review conditions of the extended consents as a one-off, but this must be started within 24 months and it needs agreement from the Director General of Ministry for Primary Industries. It's also not cost recoverable. Our council submission provides the regional context for Waikato and it makes recommendations on some specific clauses. It asks specifically to take into account existing and proposed coastal plans, given this is an area of keen interest of ours. It also asks that a consent condition review should be at the cost of the consent holder, so rather than ratepayers at large. It asks to provide a mechanism to adjust existing bond conditions to account for inflation. It also asks to remove clauses that enable the surrender of a replacement permit that is yet to be exercised. And it asks to add the Minister of Conservation to the list of persons to be notified of review of consent conditions. The submission also highlights that the intention of avoiding a bottleneck for future consent replacement is probably unlikely because our consents expire at different times anyway. In March, council staff provided comments to the Minister for Primary Industries as well on a preliminary one-pager for this proposal. In those comments, we noted that it's a bit of a blunt instrument that would limit the ability of consenting authorities like ourselves to work with consent holders to ensure sustainable management of the region's resources. As similar to the submission on the bill, we noted what the proposal to extend marine farm consents would mean in our regional context. As an alternative to the proposal, we suggested granting an extension under specific circumstances, taking into account existing and proposed coastal plans. We proposed specific conditions for our region as well, if an extension were to be granted. These conditions centred around acknowledging the proposed coastal plan, the overlays of which determine areas which are inappropriate for aquaculture, the need for consent condition review to occur and be at the cost of the consent holder, the need for clarity around end dates of consents, and a concern that some of these could be in effect for quite some time, and the need to provide a mechanism to adjust the bond conditions to account for inflation. Since considering feedback, the government modified some details, as I mentioned, and so they've gone some way in addressing some of our concerns raised. For example, they changed from a 25-year to a 20-year extension with a limited total consent duration that doesn't exceed the 31st of December 2050. And they've introduced provisions to allow for review of consent conditions as well. Some matters, like the ability to adjust a bond to inflation, are not yet addressed in the bill. So these, together with some other emerging issues, are addressed in our submission to the bill. Now, as Tracy mentioned, we've got 2 technical additions to the detailed table at the back of our submission that we would like to put to you today as well. Leah's popped these up on the screen for us, but for me to give you a bit of an explanation of them. The first is around new section 165ZFHI, which is otherwise known as the power to undertake review. There's a clause 3B in that section, and we've suggested that it should be removed. It says we can only review the extended permits once, which must be within 2 years over that 20-year duration. So we suggest that that should be removed for the reasons given there, which we note that limiting the ability of consenting authorities to review conditions would mean there's no opportunity to review for the remaining 18 to 19 years of the consent, despite any changes to the state of the environment. The second highlighted area that we would like to add to the submission is right at the end, and this is for section 165 ZFHL, which is around process for applying to review. We suggest removing clause 3, which says that a hearing must not be held as part of the one-off reviewing of coastal permits. We suggest that indeed hearing should be held, as that is corresponding to making a submission. The implication is that the consenting authority will have to make a decision simply by what has been submitted on paper, rather than having that benefit of hearing from submitters via a hearing as well. So that's a short summary of the submission and the suggested amendment additions. Happy for discussion.
Thank you. Chris.
Okay, thanks for that summary. Good. Look, in terms of the submission, I'd like to know if be aware of any conflicts between existing consents and the advertised coastal plan. That's my first question. The intent of the legislation, I hope we understand that is to the costs. That's against us 2 clauses, because I don't think that's intended to reduce costs. Actors, our submission is not, and I don't think we should be going down that path, but that's just my personal view. I do agree that consent holders should be asked to pay. If there is a review, ratepayers shouldn't be asked to pay consent holders, and I think increasing the bonds by inflation. Otherwise, I'm in favour of the fast track bill. It's intended to protect an industry which is under significant cost pressures at the moment, and we don't want to be party to being the demise of an industry which has grown, and we've given it our blessing to increase in size by, I think, about 10% over the next 10, 20 years. Roadblocks put it.
Thank you, Chris. Noel?
Yeah, I concur with some of what Chris is saying. and I support the, under page 10, 6A, where it's inappropriate, certainly support that. What concerns me is that first one that you put up, if we can have that back, please. I've got a question which may be followed by a supplementary. So limiting consent authorities, I mean, no opportunity. How often do regional consents for the likes of quarries, sand winning operations, in relation to waterways and the likes? Thinking of one that I'm very familiar with, weddings out at Ō-Rākau. I think they got a 30-year consent with a review after 20 years or something like that. So there's a 20-year period where they're not subject to review. So why then are we being inconsistent? That's 20 years up there. Why is aquaculture special, not being consistent in our action across the region?
Tracy would like to speak. Yep.
Yeah, if I can perhaps answer this. So there is no standard, blanket standard for consent duration for any activity.
Appreciate that, but it's got, there's a...
Each activity is taken on its merits. Some the types of activities have certainty such that our consent officers will grant them certainty of operation for some time. Now, depending on what the impacts are of those activities, it might be 10 years, might be 20, can't be longer than 35 under the RMA.
Yeah.
The suggestion of this provision is actually ensuring that there is a level playing field, that should a matter arise that a consent requires review, council is able to undertake that. Now, there are, as you're fully aware, Councillor Smith, tests in the Act that must be met. We can't just say, hey, we want to review your consent because somebody rang up about it. We have to step through a process. What this provision is doing is making sure there's that ability for council to step through a process if the tests in the Act can be met. At the moment, the way that this bill is framed is quite different to any other approach that council takes in the RMA that we're asked to administer under the RMA. So what we are asking here is to bring that back in line. Should we not have that ability, then there will be some interesting conversations that we'll be able to have or that we may not be able to have with consent holders. So for us, this brings these consents in line, given that this bill is giving a blanket extension of time rather than assessing each one on its effects. It's a lot when you give a extension of time and then say, and we'll take away some review provisions as well. So staff felt that it overstepped the mark a little bit.
And look, I understand that rationale from staff. I'm also looking at what the government is perhaps trying to do with this legislation and saying there's an investment here, and as you are well aware, is when a renewal of a consent comes up, you've got to then take into account the investment that has already taken place, which you do not have to take into account when first establishing that activity. So to me, there's somewhere in the middle here insofar as government wants to give these people certainty who invest in this activity and longevity. I'm just not sure that what we're asking is necessarily needed. Yeah, so that's, I'll step back and let someone else have a, and then come back with another one.
Just one further comment, and it's really just to give councillors confidence. When staff made the submissions to what was a working draft in February, we did have quite a conversation with Kristen in Resource Use Directorate, who's responsible for processing a lot of the aquaculture consents. I don't think any aquaculture consent that has been applied for in recent times has been declined. There has been quite a significant process we worked through, and all of those have had the consent duration that they have sought. The shortest consent duration I believe we have approved is around 15 years. So I just wanted to give councillors assurance that we very much appreciate the investment that our consent applicants for marine aquaculture go through.
Stu.
Yeah, for me, I think I understand what the government are trying to achieve here, but it's like some of the other stuff. I think it's a bit of a sledgehammer approach. And to my mind, given the state of the of fisheries worldwide, aquaculture, both finfish and shellfish farming, is going to become a key feature of the planet, not just New Zealand, over in our lifetimes. And to me, that's just inevitable, and I think it'll probably be positive for fisheries worldwide. But we're still pretty new at this, and I just think this whole blanket renewing something without any checks and balances, given the pressure and the interest in some of the areas where these farms are located, and you'll appreciate that too, Warren. I just don't think the means justifies the mechanism that the government are wanting to use here. So I'm generally in support of this submission. As Tracy said, I'm not convinced that the roadblocks are there that the government appear to be using to justify this approach. So that's kind of where I'm sitting. As I said, I'm very supportive of aquaculture, and I think this council is very supportive of aquaculture. But it's got to be managed properly, you know.
Thanks, Stu. Yeah, just noticing that we do have the ability to review those consent conditions, and as Miffy said, just within that 2 years of that consent being renewed. Ben.
Yeah, so this will only apply to existing consents, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So majority of those are for mussels or oysters, which generally improve the environment by filtering. They're not deemed to be pollutant.
There are people who believe they do, and there are people who believe they don't. You know, I don't think I would say blanket agree with you, and just mindful, Chris will be probably presenting to a regional coastal land panel, so he needs to be careful in his response.
Right. Well, in terms of the scientific evidence, they're filter feeders. They generally absorb the nutrients that are coming down into the firth, correct? So, secondly, in terms of our regional aquaculture strategy, this is about doubling our export growth, but those will all be new consents that will go through a different process than this one. We'll go through our normal process. So anything new is going to not be affected by this. This is just existing, I guess, as Noel's saying, existing investment in the water space that needs some consenting. And the other question was, in terms of the bonds, how often have we ever called in a bond?
Never.
I don't have any awareness of that. Do you, Chris?
No, at Waikato Regional Council, we have not, although the total bond amount is taken as the current assessed cost to remove the majority of the marine farms should they become abandoned. All regional councils in New Zealand are learning from the experience up in Northland where there was a disease in oysters that resulted in the abandonment of farms in one of the estuaries up there, and it cost Northland Regional Council a significant amount of money to remove those farms.
So do our current bonds cover us for that at the moment? So what is the economic impact of accounting for inflation? We're asking for something here. It'd be nice to know what the economic impact of that would be.
Yes, it is. It is something that we have discussed with the aquaculture industry. The new coastal plan, the current coastal plan has bonds they're necessary and they will be implemented. The new proposed coastal plan has discretion according to the risk. In the industry, they don't like the bonds, but they see the point of it. And if we don't keep them updated for inflation, then they won't cover the potential costs.
Yeah, I guess that's the risk analysis though. If we've never actually called one in, I know the industry is not happy with bonds and they certainly won't like it being for inflation proofed, adding additional money that's sitting in our bank somewhere. So I question that item C.
If I can just make a comment there. So whilst we haven't called a bond in, we have some rather comprehensive consent conditions that are able to be reviewed for our operators that we've developed in conjunction with them. Why we're asking for an inflation proofing of those bonds is obviously, should anything go awry, it is a significant investment. The only other place we would have to make up that shortfall, i.e., you know, $10,000 in 1985 is not the same as $10,000 now. The only place we would go to make up that shortfall of investment would be our ratepayers. And then we would go through an extensive recuperation exercise, perhaps from the person who left some of that legacy infrastructure there. So from us, it is very much a provision that is protecting any of these additional or legacy costs falling on our ratepayers, at least in the interim. So that's why it's inflation proofed. We inflation proof nearly everything else we do, understanding that. So in this regard, and I guess it is significant, whilst we are lucky enough not to have had one of these events occur, should it occur, it will not be cheap.
Right, so if I can just add to that, I've had discussion with the aquaculture industry and it is, and not predetermining anything in our coastal plan review, it is something that they have submitted on. And if you've read their submission, you'll be aware of that. It costs them $800 a mussel line for that bond. So there's about $2 million worth of bonds in our area. Just of note, Auckland Regional Council and their farms have no bonding system and neither do Marlborough. So the aquaculture industry is concerned of raising that bonding cost to them and it being another economic stressor on them. So just aware of those comments.
What's the average per farm then?
Oh, I couldn't tell you an average per farm. Total was, I've been told, total for the mussel farms is just over $2 million and sitting in bonds now. But what that is, well, it's $800 a string. So, and there's about 2,500 strings out there at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I meant, 2.5.
Yeah. No.
So is the bond actually a guarantee, someone's personal guarantee or a bank guarantee, or is it actual money collected and put in a trust fund or a reserve or whatever? How is that actually done? Because I'd be concerned about the mechanism behind a guarantee as opposed to if the money's lodged in the bank, but that's a huge capital outlay for startup. Just what's the mechanism?
Again, it depends on the application, but we do have a bonds policy. I know we did talk about it through the drafting of the proposed regional coastal plan, but it may have been prior to this council meeting. It's all a bit blurry now. But we do have a policy and we take bonds in accordance with that, whether they are held and the money taken up front or whether it's a guarantee. I'm not entirely sure. I understand there's probably a mixture of both.
Okay. Chris. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, the bond issue, I understand where you're coming from, Ben, but this potentially is quite a big issue. And I'll just give you a couple of instances why I believe this is the case. If one mussel farmer faults, then, and there's no bond, then there's no point in us pursuing him for collection of the cleanup costs because he won't have any money left. It'll have gone. So that's one reason. If the industry in toto falls over for whatever reason, if it becomes uneconomic to farm mussels there, we, the regional council, would be left with a huge legacy problem to clean up. I just personally don't believe that's responsible as councillors, that we shouldn't be insisting that there's not a fund there appropriately funded and administered to pay for that cleanup process. I don't know whether you've been out there and looked at them. They're a massive infrastructure. It's not what you see above the water. There's a lot under the water as well. and it will be expensive to tidy it up if the industry falls over. So I think we just have to go with the staff recommendation as far as I'm concerned.
So your point is inflation based? Tipper, I'll come to you online. You there, Tipper? You may be muted. Okay, Stu, come back to you.
I agree. You've got to have those bonds. They're never going to like them, and I probably wouldn't like them if I was them either. But we've got to remind ourselves that it's a public space as well, and the pressure on that public space is only going to get higher. So we've got an obligation to manage it. And my first term on council, we were heavily involved in the Tui mine cleanup as well, where there was no bond and they walked away, and it cost us and the taxpayers of New Zealand an absolute fortune. It was horrendous, eh? Yeah.
Ben.
Oh, yeah, just wanted to clarify, does Auckland Council or Marlborough Council have bonds?
No, Auckland doesn't. That was removed with the review of with their Auckland Unitary Plan, and Marlborough's, the scale of aquaculture they have and the issues they have with the location of some of them is a completely different kettle of fish than ours.
Well, Marlborough's larger, isn't it?
Very much so.
So they don't have bonds at all?
No. No, they have different ways to manage their marine farms.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Do we have an indication of how many consents are coming up for renewal? I know we say there's no bottleneck, but is it 1, 10, dozen?
Yes, I have written down the numbers. Now we have over 450 farms in the region. Currently, there are 14 there whose consents that would be captured by this, plus the 2 spat farms in Aotearoa Harbour.
You want to use the mic? Thanks.
I'm just concerned about that first additional clause.
Can we go back to
There
that
seemed to
on
be a
the
divergence of opinion, which obviously Stu's test if he's, that. I'm still concerned about you. I just sensed there was a difference of opinion within the group. So,
you have a proposal of some other wording or something, or your concerns, the one that's on the screen at the moment?
So the proposal is to remove subclause 3B, limiting the consenting authorities' review consent conditions with me. So it's basically saying taking away the review inhibits the regional authority to review it. So
do you have that subclause 3B there, Lizette, and how it's worded? It may just help us get a bit of clarity around what you're proposing as an alternative.
So it says a review undertaken under the subpart, and it has A and B, and then C must not, it was B, must not be undertaken more than once in relation to any coastal permit. So a review undertaken as per the power to undertake review must not be undertaken more than once in relation to any coastal permit.
there's something about having to do that within 2 years.
And that's earlier on, that consent authority must initiate a review of any coastal permits within 24 months. I can't see specifically where it is in the Act right now, but of the legislation coming into being.
So Mr. Chair, so that's saying, as I understand it, that in the period of the extended consent, if you're going to review it, you have to do it within 2 years, but then it could be any number of years out to 2050. Is it? So that's 25 years of
not review. That's.
So an existing consent will get a 20-year rollover.
Top
So
of what it's there.
on top of what it's got, and no further than 2050
2050.
year.
Yeah.
So if it's coming up now, it'll
Yeah.
go on for 20 years. It may not come up for another 10 years for another particular farm, and then that will go on for 20 years as long as it doesn't go over 2050.
Well, okay.
Sorry, and just to be clear, with no option of review through that period other than within 2 years of the Act becoming operative, is what you're.
So is it the Act becoming operative or the consent moving into the next 20 years?
I thought it was the Act becoming operative.
It is the Act. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
And the reviews only, you can only initiate a review if there's new information that comes up that didn't exist at the time of the consent being granted. Is that fundamental philosophy still applies, is it?
So look, it's been a while since I've processed resource consents, but section 128, I think, of the RMA talks about the tests, and there's quite a bit of case law to support what the tests are for a review.
Yeah.
As I said, it's not just because we think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
There are some criteria, and it's usually if something new's happened, if there are external factors, or council can choose to initiate a review if a consent operator is persistently belligerent in the operation of their consent.
So there's a lot of checks and balances there to make sure that we can't use that mechanism for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, look, I don't know enough about it, but I can only assume that this has been put in there for a very good reason, that some councils have been abusing their position in relation to consents and causing additional cost to the consent holder unnecessarily. So therefore, I have to agree, I really have to support. We've got a two-year window to make sure that there are no issues in there relating to any of the consent holders that contravene the rules, regulations and our coastal plan. That being the case, these people should be allowed to continue their businesses unimpeded. If they do break the rules, obviously there will be provisions there for us to do something about that. But if they're complying with the terms of their consents, I don't see why we should be allowed to go on a fishing expedition to upset them for no good reason. And so therefore I'm sorry, I just can't support that part of the submission.
And I guess that's a good point you raised, Chris, is the fact that if there is a breach of consent, then there's a process that we go down, regardless of when it is in that consent period.
The process of reviewing a consent versus whether a consent holder is in breach of their consent are two completely separate issues.
Yeah, I understand that.
The intent of the review process is if new information comes up. And look, as Makau will know, there's regularly calls for Mercury's consents for the hydro system to be reviewed because people feel, rightly or wrongly, that there's a whole lot of flooding implications in the upper part of the river, et cetera, To the best of my knowledge, those public calls for review have never been actioned because there's no legal justification to do it. So I think, Chris, we need to be careful to suggest that councils have been using the review mechanism as an underhanded way of being blooming difficult or frustrating the marine farmers' ability to farm, because we've got no evidence that that's been happening. It's simply a mechanism to allow us to step in if new information has come to light that wasn't available to the decision makers at the time that they granted the consent. And to me, the 2-year thing is completely bloody pointless because the consent has barely started to have been exercised. So you're never going to have new information, highly unlikely you're going to have new information to justify a review within 2 years of granting a decision. If you did, it would really call into question the process to grant the consent in the first place,
Ben.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to clarify, 450 consents, and you talked about 14 that are coming up for review. So does that mean all 450 would be rolled over under this legislation or just the 14?
Every farm that has a consent that expires within the next 20 years will have, every farm will have 20 years added to its consent expiry date up to a maximum of 2050.
Right.
But the ones that have been reviewed already, we are reasonably confident they have conditions that address biosecurity and monitoring and etc. So these 14, the majority of them would have been captured by the deemed coastal permits in 2004 that gave them a 20-year deemed consent with no review. So after 20 years, they're just coming up for another 20 years added.
Right. Thank you.
Right, so we do have a motion with two parts, and obviously once again part B delegates for any amendments. So I just want to get an idea around the committee as we're sitting now, and that review clause that we've just been talking to. Is there support for that review clause as it stands, or is there more support for looking at the wording in it, understanding some of the discussion we've spoken to today? So just a quick hands up, supporting it as it stands, and if we could just click back to it, please, Leah. Or is there a little bit more work to be done? So hands in support.
Sorry, just clarification. Are you saying is there support for the way the submission's worded, or
Yes.
support for the way?
So what we're seeking is support for this as a staff recommendation to be included in the submission, or a view to the contrary, in order for the chair and myself to work on the submission.
So hands up for those that would leave it in, and hands up for those that would take it out. Okay, so that will lean us towards the part B of the motion. So with that, currently, Stu, I'm assuming that you supported A. Are you still happy to move?
Sorry.
Ben?
I'd like to move a motion that the item, an amendment. An amendment.
Thank you, Noel.
That item C about adjusting bonds for inflation not be included.
I think there's only the two things. So so we're now moving on to that item around the bond, and just looking at where. So I'll just get your wording around that amended motion, Ben.
That 6C, provide a mechanism to adjust existing bond conditions to account for inflation, not be included in the submission.
So just point of clarification, please, Mr. Chair. You did a straw poll to sort my one out, and I played the game. Can I suggest we do it with this one as well? Otherwise,
That's exactly where I'm going. Thank you, Stu.
Contrary to standing orders, this is a direct opposite of the recommendation. Your straw poll was before, yeah. So now that we have a move and a seconder for the motion, this is a direct negative, and therefore it can't be put, I believe. I'm sorry. Not wanting, I'm just.
Process, no. Yep. Okay, we've got two online, so and we haven't heard from either of them. So, Democracy Dave, I'll throw you up first, process-wise, no doubt.
Oh, thanks for that. Nice to see you all. Now I'm going to give my advice here is to look at this on two different angles. Firstly, the straw polls that you're doing about what changes you're going to make it outside of the scope of the motion that's on the screen. So the motion on the screen essentially is if you are going to delegate to the chair and the director SPI the power to make the changes to the submission and to lodge it. The straw polls are sitting outside of that. There's no resolution or motion being done. You're really doing it quite informally, so I don't see that the direct negative rule would apply here.
Thank you, Dave.
I see clarification. Dave, a mover and seconder have put a motion, that's on the floor. So to try and do a straw poll, that's to the negative of one clause, would be, in my opinion, contrary to standing orders. Now, that's only my opinion. So can you just clarify?
1 minute, Stu.
Once it's on the floor as a moved and second motion, how can something to the negative be tested when you've got a motion live?
From what I've heard so far, Councillor Dunbar-Smith did suggest that his alteration be made a motion, but he subsequently agreed for that to be done as a straw poll, the same way that Stu's one was done before. So the motion that you've got on the floor essentially is whether or not Warren and Tracy can make these changes and then lodge. So I think you've got two different things going here. Certainly if Ben wanted to formalise his straw poll and make it a motion, then you would need to do that first before doing the motion that's on the screen.
Just point of clarification. You've got two very cooperative mover and a seconder here. You guys asked the mover and seconder, could you take out the clause with regards to the first one? Or would we take the clause out? We didn't amend it, we just took that one piece out. If Ben wants his one taken out, then you can, look, I don't want to do that. And I don't know what the seconder thinks on that. But if you want to run a straw poll on it, do it, and I'll pull away as mover because I'm not going to move it with that one taken out. But
Okay, so the reasoning behind it is that, so if we're going with 2B, and that delegates it back to Tracy and myself, is that we get an indication and a steer from this group on what those changes may be. So that is the reasoning behind it. So working on that premise, just a straw poll on that bond being inflation adjusted. Those in favour of it being inflation adjusted, please raise your hand. And against? Okay, so that gives us that steer on that. Thank you. Did you want to formalise that motion, Ben, looking at the straw poll? Okay.
Reality is, we know what we want in the submission. So the reality is, we're finalising the submission today, really, rather than needing you to go away and redo it. We're constructing the final here right now. So do we need to have the clause in you and Tracy sorted out afterwards? Because we're doing that now, aren't we?
Well, we do have the two additional items that were put in and brought to us prior to this agenda being sent out.
Okay, so what you're going to do is put them in and sign it.
Yep.
So we've got to delegate it to present it. So you just let us
help councillors because, yeah, it was done very swiftly. There's a few things in and out. We've got the steer around what remains of those additional matters. I think you can rest assured we'll capture the conversation well.
So did I have you seconding that, Noel? Yeah. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed?
Yep.
So carried. Thank you. Thank you, team. Yep, sure. So this brings us to item 10, which is page 27 in your agenda on the recommendations from the water security strategy. Tracy.
Yeah, councillors, what I did just want to highlight for you, and it's not included in the agenda pack, is and I've got it in front of me, the 24 to 26 page business case that you considered as part of the LTP on the water security management plan, which is in essence the fundamental response to this topic. So you haven't got it in there. I didn't want you to think, crikey, if we only just got 2 or 3 pages in this agenda. A lot of work has gone in. What was provisioned in the LTP is the 388K over 2 years to further this piece of work. Because I've got a fantastic memory, councillors did ask me if we needed more money for this. Did we have enough? I think my answer was, I think we've got sufficient, thanks all the same. So there is a comprehensive business case that very much will inform the project management plan. I just wanted to make sure that you thought, hang on, this is something we have furthered for a chief executive KPI, and we're looking for an inch thick document. You would have all obviously recalled reading that inch thick document in January. Over to Thomas and Mike.
Mike and Thomas, thank you.
Thank you. Chair, with your permission, I'd suggest we take that agenda report as read, if that's all right. And I can just give a high-level summary.
Thank you.
So, water security, there was a strategy that's been done. Next step is a water security plan. So moving into how we're going to action this. There were 3 main recommendations in the strategy. Recommendation 1, develop a multi-agency regional water security management plan that identifies actions, roles, responsibilities, and considers a range of information, gaps, and management options. Recommendation 2, review the current water allocation system and consider methods to address over-allocation as part of the regional plan review, including giving effect to the MPSFM. Recommendation 3, align Waikato Regional Council work programs with the water security strategy and use the management plan to target specific work programs in the LTP with KPIs for staff and senior management. So those are the 3 main recommendations from the strategy. And then there were some individual line items under recommendation 1, and those are laid out in the table in the agenda report. So yeah, that's the high level overview. And for that water security management plan, which is kind of the key thing that is new in addition to things that are already underway. Yeah, the LTP will fund a contractor or contractors to do the project planning and the writing of the security plan and the engagement associated with it. Now, of course, they won't be working alone. They'll be working with council, staff, as well as wherever possible. I hope they can tap into a lot of those existing forums that we have set up for engagement within and outside of council. So, yeah, those are the main points. Happy to provide.
If I may, Chair, I just wanted to highlight that over this last year, there's also been a couple of other pieces of work aligned with this. One was piecework to develop the roadmap. So how would we actually go about, or what are the important elements of our water security management plan, which is, as Tracy said, part of the LTP. And we presented that to the Climate Action Committee earlier in the year. The other piece of work that Thomas is just getting underway now, which is around a risk assessment. So looking to understand the levels of risk for different districts, different district councils, and major water users around the region, so that we can prioritise or focus our attention on water security for those districts that have the greatest need. And I think we're hearing more about the Future Proof group. Obviously, they've been doing a lot of work on security. So some of the smaller districts are probably where we will need to focus some of our attention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So questions, Ben?
Yeah, the review of the current water allocation system is going to have major implications for existing water users, isn't it?
Potentially, yes, yeah. Where we have significant over allocation, then that has to be addressed under the NPSFM. So in areas where that over allocation exists, that will have major implications for existing users as the allocations need to be wound back. One of the other things we've signalled right through this process is that future growth of the region is significantly constrained by water security issues, by water availability. And of course, that's then going to impact on water users and water availability for future uses as well.
So when will that review become public so that people are aware of what's going on?
It's held over.
As part of the freshwater policy review that we're progressing through at the moment, so it is very public. And one of the key issues that was raised by many of the sectors we've engaged with to date around water allocation. Also, the present regional plan actually has already embedded into it in the water allocation provisions a phased review anyway. So many of those people who hold consents for water allocation are aware that there is a phased review planned for our plan. Mike spoke about the MPS direction in regard to over allocated catchments, and that direction's been in for about 4 years, and actually before that since 2017.
And from what I recall, under the NPS freshwater management, the decision making is held centrally and was going to be decided by commissioners rather than the regional council. Does that still apply under the revised NPSFS?
So that is in the Resource Management Act, not in the RPS. So that was an amendment to the Resource Management Act for freshwater commissioners. So that is up until we develop the plan, up until we notify it, we are in control of that process. Once we notify, at the moment, and we know that the Resource Management Act is likely to be reviewed in the next 2 or 3 years, but at the moment, and there have been no signals thus far, it will proceed to the Freshwater Commission once we've notified it.
Right, thank you.
No.
I just note with the census data and the likes being released in the Waikato region is the highest growing area in the North Island. Queenstown Lakes is the highest in the country, but Waikato region has been announced yesterday or the day before as the highest growth area. My concern is when we do the allocation review and the likes, are we going to be forward thinking enough? Are we looking at not necessarily cutting the pipe to Auckland because of protecting our own communities? And I know the river's in about 3 sections and has to be at a certain level all the way through, and Auckland gets our dregs. But the reality is I want to make sure or have a commitment that future growth within this region is not impacted by water takes to external regions. I know that, but the reality is, it's not forcing Auckland to preserve. I know when we had water restrictions in the Waikato a few years ago, Auckland didn't. It was just sucking water out of the river. And so it's not forcing a change of behaviour on the largest community in the country to manage their water better. And they're not looking at alternative supplies. So I just want to see that we make sure that we protect the future of our communities to grow.
We can't give any assurance, obviously. There is no statutory impediment or requirement, I should say, for us to give that undertaking. The one thing I would say is that water is incredibly complex, And we would need every person, including all of the municipals who take water from the system, to have in place appropriate measures so that we know they are taking water in the most efficient manner possible. At the moment, that doesn't exist for one of the largest urban areas who is fed by the water. So there are many variables that need to be part of this conversation. If it was simple and easy, we would have nutted it out by now. But what we are very mindful of is every water take impacts somebody's livelihood and their lives. So we have to get it right, which is the whole purpose of this plan. And I would just remind that the first take and the first responsibility is back to the water body itself.
Is the regional plan or whatever mechanism able to have the provision that municipal authorities are required to have water meters? Because my own experience has seen huge benefits from that, and the leaks are found and consumption comes down, and the need to expand infrastructure is delayed into the future because you're not trying to provide up to 20–30% for leaks. It's amazing.
Just to help you out, our regional policy statement since 2016 has had that requirement in. The regional plan at the moment does not have it in as a requirement. That's not to say that it can't be discussed with municipals when they're going through their resource consenting process.
Be review when we're reviewing it now. So why can't we look at that as being one of the requirements?
It's something that's in the mix.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Robbie.
100% support what Noel just said. But what I understand is when you put meters on water, the water reduction is about 60%. It's huge. So that's a huge amount of water that gives back to the greater catchment. The other issue I've got is how large organisations were given water applications that still haven't been used, yet they're being allowed to be sold off and leased to other users. And I reckon that area needs to be fixed and tightened up. And because that is all our water, not that group and all those groups, and how they can actually lease that out to industry and not even their own catchment, I've got real difficulty with. And I think this council needs to do something about that, because that's all of our water, not their water. And they're selling off our water to other organisations. And until that's resolved, I think you're mucking around, having a hard time giving every individual landowner that's actually behaving themselves and doing a good job. Yet we've got a couple of groups out there that are laundering it from the rest of us. And I don't think that's fair on anybody in the Waikato region for that to be taking place. So I think that needs to be resolved and quickly.
Yep.
Can I just say all these matters are at play right now. That's, what this particular item is about is let's look forward into the future, having consideration for all these matters we're discussing. But matters you're talking about, Councillor Cookson, are exactly the conversations we're having now with our freshwater policy.
Thank you, Tracy. Tipper online.
Kilda, I'm hoping you can hear me.
Yes,
Sorry
we can
for
hear you fine,
stopping.
Tipper.
Awesome. Again, just adding to that list of matters that we're no doubt considering, and Auckland's renewal of their consent in the future. They're treated as a water user from this river, but they don't contribute anything. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that leads on from Noel's point. Yeah, thanks, Tipper. Ben.
Yeah, just one point. Looking at the next item, which is Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, I was delighted to see balancing trade-offs and understanding economic realities, recognising that land use changes can have economic implications. In doing the review of current water allocation, will we also get an idea of what the economic impact of that is? Is that part of your review process?
It is part of the understanding that, or putting together that management plan. I think one of the core objectives of that management plan is to understand both the supply and the demand. And so that demand, and what I think Thomas talked about in the paper, there's a prioritisation sort of assessment in there as well, is making sure that the water is going to the right places. And the other councils have already mentioned areas perhaps where that's not happening. So we have to understand how much water we've got and where it's going now. Where is it perhaps best from a regional value perspective? Where is it best to go in the future? And that can feed into the regional plan review.
Thank you.
Can you use your mic, please?
Ask a silly question. And when's this regional plan due to come back before a council?
Mr. Chair, I'm in the middle of writing a report for the 25th June Council as agreed at the last council workshop on the 23rd of April. So in 3 weeks' time, you've got a workshop on it next week.
So when are we looking to have something to go out for consultation to the public?
That'll be dependent on a decision of council on the 25th of June.
You sound like a politician, Madam Director.
I didn't hear her sitting on the fence. Excellent. Any other questions? Thank you, Stu and Noel. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? So carried. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Thomas? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. No one's yawning or doing anything, so there you go. Well, no.
Mr. Chair, just before Blair presents his report, just as Blair, not Alejandro. Alejandro's on training today. You will recollect back in April that you did have a workshop with the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment and one of his advisors. There were some great questions asked at that workshop. These reports are a culmination of the work that the PCE has been doing, and I have also highlighted to a number of councillors that the team is working with the Parliamentary Commissioner on the environment and some logistics and meetings in catchment. Those meetings are not owned by WRC. They are meetings that the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment has just asked for a bit of local knowledge on. So pass over to Blair to give the highlights of the report.
Thank you, Blair.
Morena, committee, Mr. Chair. The report that you have in your agenda is complementary to the presentation I'm going to make now, and certainly indebted to my colleague Alejandro to put that together for you. The Parliamentary Commissioner recognises that we have a strong history of land use change and strong drivers for land use change, but also there are some barriers. If I may have the presentation moved on. Thank you. This is something that historically the last 3 PCEs have addressed. Morgan Williams originally with the Growing for Good report 20 years ago, his successor and the current Parliamentary Commissioner, Simon Upton, has had a couple of goes at it. It builds upon 2 case studies where he takes quite detailed physiographic information, GIS layers, and looks at how land use responds environmentally to different uses. The case studies he uses is Southland and Northland, and that's covered in paragraphs 8 to 11 in your agenda report. What he identifies is some critical problems there. He has some ideas of what we need to do better and identifies 4 critical barriers and provides some solutions. And as Tracy mentioned, he wants to engage with landowners to talk about his findings in the report. Next slide, please. This diagram shows that for the last 20 years, well, 22 years, there's been quite a bit of land use change. And the two case studies that he uses, the Mataura and the Northern Wairoa, have shown pretty clearly that it's, and the ETS has been the economic driver mainly of land use change that we've had. Next one, please. And he does look at the environmental impacts of land use, particularly in contaminants, that is pollutants, E. coli, microbugs, nutrients and sediments, and recognises that the greatest pressure on land-based industries on the environment are the contaminations to water, the biogenic greenhouse gas emissions, and the biodiversity loss associated with land use change. And he makes the point in that order. He makes also the point in his report that the status quo, the current land use, is not environmentally or economically viable beyond the short term, and it poses risks to our market access for produce from the land. And he also makes he recognises that climate disruption will leave some landowners stranded, and the future will definitely not look like the past. And that previous diagram really shows that we're changing land use quite a bit. Next slide, please. The government response to those matters, whether it be freshwater, whether it be climate change or emissions as well, and biodiversity, are not integrated. They're addressed in a piecemeal fashion by various bespoke policies and ministries, and the funding is also not integrated, it's separated. So it's quite a hard, challenging environment for landowners to navigate as well. And it's very difficult to identify those links. Next slide, please. Makes the point that climate change will change everything. And over the years, there's been a gathering realization that a changing climate is placing a wide range of land uses at risk. And this is not just rural land use, this is urban land use as well in hazardous places. He recognises that the way we farm, crop and grow trees will change whether we like that or not. And we recognise that as part of the shift in climate, and it sort of goes back to the previous discussion you had as well, is about water. We're drying up, and climate adaptation is about too much water or too little water primarily. Too much water has certainly costs associated by infrastructure problems, well, destruction of infrastructure, natural hazards, but also too little water is an economic risk to current land uses and associated with temperature and wind. And he also makes the point that market access is becoming an increasing issue, and smaller enterprises are being required to address or know their emissions and address and reduce emissions, particularly through market access, through Scope 3 supply chain pressures. And he talks about policy responses and more on the emissions pricing, going back to the ETS, which is currently just $51 at the moment. So next slide, please. So, yeah, I'm working on a slightly historic version of this. Just making sure that it's aligned, and yeah, okay. Recognising that catchments are the appropriate scale to address a lot of the issues, but a lot of the decisions are made at the farm level and property ownership level. He also recognises that greenhouse gas emissions are best dealt with globally, but and so they're out of the frame. But adaptation nutrients, sediments and bugs. Definitely addressed best at the catchment and property scale. Recognising that to make good decisions, you need good information, and that's dispersed at the moment and not available. Makes a recommendation. Oh, I should have prefaced this, sorry. Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment is an officer of Parliament. The recommendations are for government, but he does pick us into that equation because we're a delegated instrument of government in that we allocate water. And he talks about devolved decision-making to catchment groups at that scale. And he also recognises that there needs to be new instruments available. At the moment, the only way we can manage water is regulatory controls, and you just had a bit of a discussion about that as well. But he talks about pricing water. And this council was actually 2017 developed the freshwater strategy for water, and water pricing was one of the mechanisms that we advocated there. But you're not going to get water pricing unless you can sort out iwi rights and interest to water. So there's sort of dependencies there. He talks about pricing biogenic methane, and that comes back to the ETS, recognising that that needs a separate system. And also talks about a land adjusted tax for land use intensity. It's effectively saying that if you're going to assist natural capital, the enhancement and in that it's effectively if a farmer's going to put area aside and plant trees, they should be rewarded for that. That's what he's saying. If a developer's going to concrete it over, they should be taxed for that. That's the trade-off he's talking about there. Well, you know, it's another instrument at the moment. You know, with the public policy instruments, carrots, sticks, and servants, you've got the stick, and it's really difficult to affect behaviour change just using a stick. You need those other instruments combined as well. He identifies 4 particular barriers to change. New slide, please. They are the absence of tradable water rights, water permits, saying the current allocation system is first come, first served. It's linked to the land title generally. It capitalises land values, and some catchments, obviously he makes the point that are over allocated and therefore the transition is challenging. And talks about the practice of grandparenting pollution rights, which is really an allocation of the assimilative capacity of a water body, which is changing over time with climate change. It's getting less as we're drying out. So that's an issue, and the need to address Maori rights and interests. Second point he makes is land use controls, saying, and going back to that point before, of separate policies for freshwater quality, biodiversity, and climate change. And also recognising that policies are complex, they're not consistent around the country as different regional councils. He specifically says, because we are the delegated sort of water management agency, but also recognising that we do control land use for water quality as we do with Taupō and other catchments. But that land management decisions are still largely in the hands of landowners. Recognising that it's difficult to accurately measure and attribute environmental change to a particular land use, and this comes from the 2 case studies that he draws upon. And also recognises that regulatory rigidity, and you'll know about that, that it's difficult to separate particular management effects from land uses. It's also what is not stated is the recognition that regional councils only control land for water, not for biodiversity. We do our biodiversity through other mechanisms or greenhouse gas emissions. So biodiversity is land use that territorial authorities have more of a rollover than we do, and greenhouse gas emissions are supply chains and markets. Next one was the barrier was, oh, sorry, not next slide, but next point on that previous slide, was emissions trading scheme, and he has some real problems with that at the moment. Calls it a blunt instrument, and obviously the price is just hovering around what it takes to a forest. He says it's good for afforestation, but not for reducing emissions, and that is causing suboptimal land use for freshwater quality, climate change adaptation, and Indigenous biodiversity. And also makes the point that permanent carbon forests reduce employment and decimate communities. Last one was profitability, and makes the point that it's expensive to change land use. And many land users have recently invested in a change of land use and want to amortize that. So generally, when you're looking at what to do in the future, there's a bias towards the status quo. He says it's essential to invest in land use, and it's difficult for landowners to receive agnostic land use change advice, because typically if you're a dairy farmer, your dairy advisor comes in and talks about how to do things better, not how to do different things. So that's that. And also small businesses are being really required now to meet market requirements, and we're even negotiating trade deals that have greenhouse gas emissions built into them. Next one, please. So he has some potential solutions there, and that accords with paragraph 7 in your report, so I won't go into that, but I will pick up on Tracy's point that what the PCE, the next slide please, that the PCE also wants to talk with landowners. So his strategy is to give landowners a couple of months to assimilate what's in the report. There's a heck of a lot in it, and it's only 60 odd pages, but there's a lot in it for that size of report. And he's wanting to engage with farmers in 4 particular regions. We're one of them. And so, as Tracy mentioned, he's asked for our help with on-site logistics and local knowledge. And there'll be a public meeting in the evening of 1st of August at Tauhei Memorial Hall. And the general evening will be a presentation from the PCE about the report, about his findings, a panel discussion. We will recommend, and he wants to talk with regulators, landowners, catchment group representatives, that sort of thing. We'll submit a list of people that we recommend for that panel discussion, that local one, and certainly the chair's name. I just see Pamela, you just turned come in. Certainly we'll be recommending you as part of that as well, followed by a Q&A and discussion afterwards. And that's really the report. I didn't spend too much time on or any time on the case studies. It's in summaries in your agenda item, and also the link is there as well.
So thanks for that, Blair. We've got a few questions. I've got Ben first.
Yeah, Blair, I wanted you to go over item number 7, which was your previous slide that you skipped through completely. I've read the report where it talks about item 7, and it's nice to hear balancing trade-offs, understanding economic realities, and I hope some of those things come through in our reports.
Yes, he did make the point about the access to information, and he's very strong on that in a number of different forums, and also reports about the need for central government to invest in good information. At the moment, it's sort of very difficult to access, but he also makes the point, if the taxpayer is, and because this is a recommendation to central government, and so if the taxpayer is going to invest, then landowners who avail themselves and businesses who avail themselves of that information really have a duty to achieve social license to actually operate in a congruent way with environmental expectations.
And he also talks about understand the financial realities faced by landowners and communities. Understanding the economic side of things, not just it's the balance between the environmental and the economic, cultural, social.
He does make a personal statement at the start of the report because he is a farmer at Ngārawa here, and recognises all the way through it that it takes finance to actually make land decisions. But he also recognises that the main driver is the climate and what's happening with we're drying out, but also what's the expectations of markets. You say the produce and
But he also talks about equity so that the costs are distributed fairly among stakeholders. So
definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Those are obviously factors that clearly, while the climate is going to impact farmers in particular, he's talking about what is the economic impact when you make a policy statement.
Strong on that, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, noting that, Ben, it's good to see that balance in there. It's something we don't often see in reports. Stu.
Yeah, just on that, I mean, he talks about the, the strong acknowledgement of the costs, I think, forming a view on what he means by balance is probably open to interpretation. Yeah, because I'm not seeing anything in there that suggests that he makes a point in there that the true costs that agriculture has imposed on the environment have been conveniently ignored for a long, long time as well. So don't forget that. Yeah. Blair, just trying to understand what he's, and you might not even know this. I'm still trying to work out where to next from this process, because as he's acknowledged as well, there's a whole lot of issues raised in here, but not necessarily a whole bunch of solutions. The likes of this hui, I think you said 1st of August at Tauhei. What sort of output would we be expecting from that? Have you sort of got any thoughts on that?
Not at the stage.
Yeah.
It's very early stage.
Yeah.
Just to the basic logistics of when and where.
Yeah.
And a potential format. For it. He'll be, as I mentioned, his audience is central government. Central government is going through some radical upheavals with resource management at the moment. A lot of what has said, I would suggest, we had some fixes for with the idea of spatial plans. That's not there now. It's for item is for information.
Yeah.
I'm not inside the PCE's head. There's a lot in here.
Thanks.
He does talk about needed effort and funding should be focused to the areas with the greatest challenges, talking of catchments and regions there. Hence, he wants to talk with 4 regions. He suggests that we've got to try things, we've got to experiment, but we must work with landowners in doing that. He also recognises that we have a lot of information. We know a lot about what we should be doing, but not optimistic about the capacity of institutions to do it. But that obviously, it's unsaid, but there's a funding element there.
Just following on from Stu's point, Blair, is a couple of things for me. One, input we can have into that public meeting and the information and what landowners sort of are exposed to this report and given the chance to have some feedback in that Te Ao meeting. And my recommendation would also be alongside Pamela on that Q&A panel as the chair of ICM, etc. in that space as well. So just putting those couple of things out there. Chris.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Blair, were you at the meeting that we had upstairs? We had Bud Manhandren here from the Archimedes Pumps?
No.
Okay, that's unfortunate. Unfortunate that Simon Upton wasn't there as well. Because, and I'm going to give you a bit of a history lesson here. But it transpired at that meeting, and I asked the question that Holland, as we all know, is one of the lowest lying countries in the world. So if there's going to be any impact on a country by climate change and sea level rise, then you'd expect it to happen in Holland first. He said the level of sea level, they've been farming the same areas for the last 1,200 years, and the level of water sea level rise affecting that is negligible. He said the terns that they built their houses on 1,200 years ago are still there today at the same levels as they were 1,200 years ago. So effectively, the sea level hasn't changed. He said Greenland is called Greenland for a purpose, because when they first arrived in Holland, Greenland was green. It's now covered in ice, as we all know. So the theory that Simon Upton is proposing about climate change, the climate's always changing, but to suggest that it's climate changing to the level that it's going to affect our farming communities to the level that it's going to become uneconomic, I think needs to be challenged. And I'm sure at the meeting in Tauhei, I hope you've got all night to listen, because I think it's going to be pretty challenging if you give the farmers an opportunity to read that paper before the meeting and then tell them that they're going to be kicked off the land because climate change is going to make it unworkable. So yeah, I can comment on a few other things as well, but I think it's a shame that people didn't, those that didn't hear Gerard in his presentation, it was an eye-opener. Yeah, you should have been there.
Tracy, I'll come to Tracy.
Yeah, councillors. Councillors, I just wanted to make the point that this is the PCE's gig, not ours. We will definitely recommend both Pamela and Councillor Cookson. It's up to the PCE. He should select or not all of our recommendations. Blair's also working with Adam Munro as well, just to make sure, you know, we get people out there. It's not up to us to disseminate this report. They are out there and they are public. But if you would like the links, we can give you those so you can disseminate them amongst your groups. Well, they're actually already in this report, so please grab those. We'll also send the presentation out. So for those people who don't want to read the inch-thick document, you've got the highlights from Blair's presentation. But I just want to be really clear, and this is a message that I have heard from previous councils, know when it's our gig and when it's not our gig, because people will start having conversations with us about this report and it's not our report, but we want to make sure that the right people are being spoken to by the PCE. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Chris.
Tracy, I think, look, I hear what you're saying, but because we're very closely associated with this and it's part of our work that the Regional Council does, we are going to be held accountable, believe it or not, by these people. And the councils that represent the farming community, they're going to get a lot of questions about this. So I would like to think that the report is made readily available, and you're quite right, it's available through links, but that we make that fact known through our means of communications with the farming groups, so that they've all got time to read it, understand it, and they can come armed with the right questions to that meeting.
Thanks. I've got Tipper online, and then I'll come to Ben. Is there Tipper?
I just was going to put the resolution, I'll move it, the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Tipper.
I'm happy to second. Just to, I know it's only 80 pages actually. It's a fraction of the size of Tracy May's reports.
Yeah, Ben.
Two things. One, is it worth asking the PCE for a 2-page summary so that it can be, it's got one there?
Yep.
Okay. Well, no, just so it goes out to the farming community and those who are going to come along. And secondly, if ours is one of 4 regions that's been identified by PCE and that they're talking about additional government funding needs to be directed towards resolving these issues, is it useful in our submissions process for funding applications to quote this report?
Thank you, Blair.
Yeah, if I may just make some comment on the mechanics of the meeting.
Sure.
On 1st of August. I've held off advising recommendations for attendance panel membership until this meeting for the very purpose that I think, but also one of the things that the PCE's team has asked for is what are the best ways to get this out there? So certainly we have conduits, but as Tracy said, it's their gig, it's not ours, but we're assisting so that they get the right people there, and so we get that good conversation and discussion.
Thanks, Blair. And I'm sure councillors will pick up on that and get that out through their networks. Yeah, Noel.
I'm just wondering whether there couldn't be a little notice at the field days on our site. Just, you know, you've got 100,000 people going through there in 4 days. A good percentage of them are farmers.
Above my pay grade, but the Tauhei Hall holds 200 people.
And that's a shame. It's got a big car park.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say.
Robbie.
I know it's outside the scope a bit, but I heard Andrew Hogarth speak on Sunday, and all he kept saying is property rights are coming back, property rights are coming back, property rights are coming back. And that's what he said in his speech for nearly half an hour in the new RMA reforms. So I'd hate to hear that, you know, if you're having a public meeting and those farmers are going to start hearing that, it isn't going to be a nice meeting. I think that this meeting could actually get out of control pretty quickly. So, and I know, yeah, so I don't know. It's going to be, I think it, we have to be very careful how we want to publicise this, I believe. Yeah. Thank you.
Just to that, Robbie, I think knowledge is power. So I think as long as this report, as it's been indicated, will be going to central government. So if our communities out there are aware of what's in it, then we can give some feedback to it.
Yeah, but I went to the PC meeting at anyway, and that got out of hand pretty quickly. So I just be careful, okay?
We'll man the door. Tracy?
Councillors, what we may be able to do to assist you, I think, is to have some clear talking points once we hear from the PCE. So we can help. I totally respect what Councillor Hughes has said. Many people will just see .govt at the end of it and think it is our meeting, our conversation. I understand that. But I think for you to help you have conversations, because many people will start to ask you what this meeting is, we'll just put together a bit of a quick cheat sheet so you know what the messages are, why we're involved, why we'll be turning up, but who's actually the meeting is. I think that would help you guys. Yeah.
Thanks, Tracy. Okay, I want to wind this up, but I'll come to Ben and then I've got Jen online and then we'll finish up. Thanks.
I just wondered if the Tatunui hall would be bigger. It's not. No, but I mean, you can make recommendations or suggestions because I think the 200 will get capacity.
Let's see where it goes. Okay, Jen, online.
Hey, yeah, no, thanks everyone. And good report, good presentation. Just to Robbie's point about, you know, how this meeting could go, I think there's an onus on each and every one of us when we talk about this report with others to make sure that we also help this meeting go well. I wouldn't want to see anyone out there whipping up fear about things, or, you know, this is a opportunity for our region to look really good, working in partnership with the PCE. So that's what I'd be keen to see. I totally appreciate raising the point, Robbie. But yeah, it's on us as leaders to make that a success.
Thanks, Jen. Robbie.
All right, and just the other thing about the scope of the emissions, it was brought up at the Fonterra, my conference in Auckland that I went to 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And the genomics of breeding is going to be able to control most of that in the next 10 to 15 years, because of the way it's the breeding from a different, from an younger age group. So there's actually a 10-year gain in genetics coming through. So the emissions of animals are going to be able to, like the ones we start, and it's like in another year's time, the calves we breed will, within 3 years, will have like a 10% drop in emissions. That's already happening. I know that will take 10 years to come through, but all of a sudden when it does, there's all of a sudden a huge genetic gain, and then you're genetically improving off those ones again next, when they're breeding again on the next. So Fonterra wasn't actually all that scared of emissions at the moment. They were quite positive towards emissions. They believe their scope, yeah. So I just thought I'd just say that. So yeah, thank you.
Technology is a solution to a lot of things. Right, we have a motion on the table. It has been moved and seconded. So all those in favour? Opposed? So carried. Thank you very much, Blair. What I might do is break now for 10 minutes. We're not too far away from the end, and then I think we'll be able to get that biodiversity report in as well prior to lunch. So if we can be back at 22 promptly, please, thank you.